Well, thank you for joining us. This is Platform on the network service of the NTA. I'm Ruth Aguela. In 2018, African countries signed a landmark trade agreement, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which commits countries to remove tariffs on 90% of goods, which could see the continent significantly improving its intra-trade levels, thereby boosting the economic welfare of Africa. Now, the agreement is expected to expand access to markets at the regional and international levels, promote agricultural transformation, thereby expanding both farmers and countries' capacity to invest in modernizing the agricultural sector. But before reaping the benefit of all of this, there are certain areas that must be put into check. Quality and standard of food commodities before export, which makes the Nigeria Agricultural Quarantine Service very relevant in that regard. Now, the Quarantine Service is a regulatory body under the Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development, created to promote and regulate sanitary and phytosanitary measures in connection with the import and export of agricultural products. A lot of questions readily comes to mind. How has the Quarantine Service been able to deal with the challenge of certifying food commodities for export? Why is Nigerian produce banned in Europe and Asia? What is the criteria for import and export? So many questions, but our focus on Platform is AFCFTA prospect for Nigeria agricultural export. And our guest is no other person than Dr. Vincent Isegbe. He's the DG, Nigeria Agricultural Quarantine Service. Thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
All right, let me just go quickly through his profile. Dr. Vincent Isegbe has 3 decades of cognate experience in quarantine administration and management. He was appointed the Pioneer Director General of the Nigerian Agricultural Quarantine Service in December 2018. Until his appointment, Dr. Isegbe was the Coordinating Director of the Quarantine Service. He began his career as a veterinary officer in the Federal Department of Livestock, Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development, and has served as the head of Animal Quarantine Department in the Quarantine Service. During his term as Coordinating Director, Dr. Isegbe conceived and launched the Export Improvement Initiative, a backward integration intervention designed to increase the volume of export in customary Nigerian agricultural commodities and emerging commodities such as sesame, soybean, cinnamon, pigeon pea, sugarcane, honey, and snail. And he sits on the board of Rubber Research Institute of Nigeria, Benin City. He's an accomplished author, and he's passionate about expanding the frontiers of export market for Nigerian agricultural products. There's so much to know about Dr. Vincent Isegbe, but let's focus on AFCFTA prospect for agricultural export in Nigeria. And I won't be the only one on Platform. I have my panelists as usual. Please make welcome Musa Baba Aliyu. He's our agri correspondent here. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you.
All right, now let's begin this way. Let me start with your vision. You know, your vision is to build an institutional capacity of the Nigerian Agricultural Quarantine Service to function at the level of excellence and also contribute to the rendition of agricultural sector as a way of, enhancing wealth creation. Looking at all these years you've served in the Quarantine Service, what will be your assessment of the Quarantine Service?
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be invited to the Nigerian Television Authority. The Quarantine Service worldwide is, I'll call it an elite corps, because the professionalism and what you need to do there should be at the topmost considerations. It's not just an agency of government, created for the inspection and certification of agricultural produce alone, but the details of what the Quarantine Service does is such that it is so enormous. And to compound matters, for the General Quarantine Officer, no university teaches quarantine so far. So you need to have your first basic qualification either as a veterinary doctor or as an agric officer or as a fisheries officer or a laboratory science officer, and then you come and you start the journey in the Nigerian Agricultural Quarantine Service. So as you come in, you first of all introduce to what are the norms. You mentioned in your introductory speech what we call the sanitary and phytosanitary protocols and procedures, as the case may be. These are not static. They are very dynamic and they change from time to time. I need to understand what applies to one country and what does not apply to another country. And then the situations in a particular country may be different from others, even if they remain within the regional bloc and they have regional standards and specifications. One country can decide to say, okay, for me, I have upped the game and this is what I want to be. And you need to understand that. Then coming to the African perspective, we are way behind most of our standard procedures and protocols. And we need to put that in proper perspective, particularly for Nigeria. Let me give you one shocking statistics. You know, for world trade, it's important that you have specific certifications for the process, for the commodity, and then the facility. Whatever facility, whether an export processing facility or whatever, needs to be certified that this is a standard export processing facility and documented as such. Now, what you do in that factory, that process, has to be certified and documented.
Okay, you're going to give us the breakdown of all of these as we progress in the discussion. But let's look at the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which, you know, if it's been able to fulfill its potential, looking at diversifying and transforming African economies, which is the main goal, what would you say is the benefit? Because according to records in 2015, African countries spent over $63 or more billion on food import. If we're looking at this Continental Free Trade Agreement, what are the benefits for Nigeria and other African countries?
Good, thank you. Africa should not even spend half of that amount of money in food imports in the first place, because we have the largest arable land compared to other continents. We have the best of weather. We don't have winter. We can plant virtually throughout the year. We have large bodies of water that we can use for irrigation, for farming. Probably the only challenge that we have in Africa is probably pests and maybe to a larger extent poor soil quality. But again, we have everywhere. We have the cheapest labor that we could turn around to produce as much as we can and then export to those countries that don't have such land and such opportunity to produce those large quantities. But coming straight to your question, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is one of the best things that has happened to Africa as a regional bloc. Hitherto, everybody was just on his own. We were looking at individual national markets. But with the coming together of the AFCFTA, we now have a voice, so to say, to decide our own standards, to decide what we want to sell, and to decide who to sell it to. And at the same time, too, we have the first, how do they put it? They say something of rejection, first priority for rejection. That's the way they call it, I can't remember now. That is to say, if we have the opportunity of selling to an African country, is our first choice before we consider another person. So that gives us a lot of protection and power, so to say, to be able to fend for ourselves and to defend our economy so that other regional bodies do not take us for granted and determine exactly what we should do. I'll give you just one example. Cocoa. Europe, they don't have one single tree of cocoa. Yet they determine the price of raw cocoa beans and they eventually determine the price of the finished processed cocoa, which is chocolate. We produce, we cannot determine. We buy, we cannot determine the price. So head or tail, the African continent loses. But now that we're coming together as a regional market, we can decide to agree, control and regulate the production, the science and development of the cocoa itself, and then the world trade, so that the benefit of coming together, will enjoy that. Then you have the large population of Africa compared to other nations. Nigeria alone is about 206 million now, the projected estimate for 2020. That's a large market that everybody wants to come in and then to buy. Now, in 2019, we have serious trade deficit balance with Russia. 740 million US dollars as against 43.43 million US dollars. So that's a negative trade balance between Nigeria and Russia. So, which means we need to do a lot to be able to export more to Russia. And there are so many other countries like that. So those gaps, why are we not filling them up? Is it that there isn't enough market? Of course there are. But we're limited by the standards of what we produce and the fact that as a nation, we have not agreed to conform to standards, even within us here in our local markets. We are not just producing good standards for the international market. It is what we produce here that we eventually take outside. Though there are some farms, like I said, that are specifically export-oriented farms. They produce specifically for the export market. So they produce premium products and they earn premium price for those commodities.
Okay, I know Musa wants to come in now.
Yeah, before we go into standard and quality, let's look at your basic regulation in terms of when you are exporting agricultural produce from Nigeria to other countries. What are the criteria put in place for me to meet before I will be able to allow to move my agricultural produce out of Nigeria?
Now, every commodity has its own specifics. You have the roots and tubers, you have the vegetables and fruits, you have the grains, then you have other processed, value-added products that we have in the country. So, and like some countries, take snail. The US will not like to take fresh, live snails. They will not. But the UK will take frozen and processed snails. So you need to know which country you are exporting to. That is important for you to know. And that's why we encourage anybody intending to do export to come and sit down with us. What commodity do you intend to export? And where do you intend to export it to? That is one thing we need to know. But the basic thing is that it's important for us as a nation to understand that the export market is not an all-commerce market. It's not everybody that wake up today and say, I want to export today. Because like you rightly pointed out, there are standards for you to maintain for each of those commodities, and there are parameters in those standards. There's pesticide level, there's even the color of the product, there's the shape of the product, there's what we call mechanical damage, so to say, debris, deaths, and all those things that you need to look at.
Okay, after looking at all those things now and looking at the continental free trade now, does the continental free trade altering your own procedure? Because it's a free market now. Once I produce, I can go to any African countries to sell. So does that mean that your own criteria now is not tangible looking at the continental free trade agreement?
We are working closely with the AFCFTA Secretariat. Very, very close. In fact, they are one of our strongest partners because we are doing the same thing. Our goal is the same thing. The AFCFTA is coming to help organize that market into a very strong force to ensure that they're able to go into the market. The quarantine service is ensuring that when they organize the market, they can have access to that product going out. So we're partners in progress. We are not working as crossroads with each other. No, we are working together with the AFCFTA Secretariat. But once the AFCFTA have the criteria for that trade and what they need to do, it's important too that in the AFCFTA there are standards embedded in those commodities, and people should know exactly what they need to do to be able to sell.
Okay, and I know
working very closely.
Okay, I know if we're looking at the Continental Free Trade Agreement, African countries have been urged to develop, effective policies and strategies that will work well for them. If they're looking at industrialization, value chain development, and all of that. But from what you're saying, yes, the trade is free. We call the shots now. We decide the kind of value we want to render, the kind of service, and all of that. But in all of this, do we put aside quality and standard of this produce? Because it's not just for the African market. Subsequently, even if Africa grows, we're going to look at the international market.
Definitely.
So what are your thoughts?
That's exactly where we are going to. Quality, standards, traceability. You know, you need to have all those things in place. The quality, like I discussed about, you have to meet it. What is the pesticide level? What is even the humidity of the grain or whatever? Is it free of bacteria? If you're exporting vegetables or meat, does it have what you call either E. coli or salmonella? Those are bacteria that can cause food poisoning. So you must make sure that they are free from all those bacteria, viruses, pests, diseases, and what have you, as the case may be. Then, the other criteria too that you need to understand. Where is the commodity coming from? Is it coming from Sokoto or is it coming from Ibadan? Even in that Ibadan, which part of Ibadan is it coming from? And which farm? Should there be an issue with that commodity in the US or Europe, they should be able to trace it to that farm in Ibadan to say this is where the situation arose from. And they will be able to find out, okay, they ate this vegetable and maybe they had, God forbid, they had food poisoning or something. Now we'll now find out what happened in that farm. Is it the water that was contaminated? Or is it the human beings that got infected, or they had dysentery or diarrhea, as the case may be, and they did not wash their hands well, and the water or whatever came on top of the vegetable and it was exported? So those things need to be done.
Which is part of your mandate?
Yes, which is part of our mandate. And that's why I was saying earlier on, when I was trying to introduce the whole thing, that the work of quarantine is so enormous. For us to be able to export properly, the quarantine has to occupy that strategic position to facilitate that. And I will say right away that because of the challenges we have as a nation, the quarantine service cannot push, or is not able to push sufficiently enough. Let me give an example. For now, you go to the open market, people selling vegetables, they are selling it on the floor or on the table. Some are carrying the vegetables on their motorbike. The wheel, the dust is spilling something on the vegetable. Some are tying it and putting it on top of their vehicles. Those are not standard national procedures. But again, if the local government who owns those individual markets insists that this and this and this should be done, there's most likely going to be uproar to say, oh, these people don't want us to do business. There's no this. But we should accept the fact that there are standards. As painful as those procedures seem to be, we should put it in place if Nigeria wants to go somewhere. In overseas countries or in other developed countries, even the vegetable they sell, they put pipes and they release fine spray of cool air over those vegetables. It's to ensure that they remain fresh. You come and pick it fresh and you cook it fresh and you enjoy value for it.
Is that why some of our agricultural produce are rejected up to now in some of the European market?
Well, indirect answer to your question is only beans that we're having issues with.
The dry beans?
Yes, to the UK.
Only beans has been rejected?
Only beans for now is officially on suspension. The other issues we have are on individual basis merit. Maybe like sometimes somebody is exporting vegetable. He puts ogi or he puts this agbo, hide it somewhere. And when they see it, agbo is not a certified product that quarantine has put on the phyto certificate. So once they see what we call concealment, that agbo or agidi or whatever has been concealed in a certified agricultural produce. Now, technically by international law, the whole of that consignment is seen as contaminated.
That was my earlier question. Right?
Yeah.
If I want to export, okay, let's look at, maybe I want to export maize, for example, to Europe, and I come to you that, okay, this is the maize. What and what are you looking at? And in the certificate you are going to issue to me, and the one I'm going to send to the receiving country, what and what are there in the certificate, and they're also going to look at?
There are about, if I remember, about 42 or so items on that certificate.
On one particular product?
On one phyto certificate. From your name to the person who is picking the certificate, to where it's going to the specific biological name of that commodity, to the weight, the volume, as the case may be, and for what purpose, to the destination point, the point of exit, the point of entry, and the examination that you have conducted. If you fumigated, what did you use in fumigating it? What's the quantity? All those things are stated in the certificate. But in direct answer to your question, in a way that if I'm an intending exporter, what do I need to do? First and foremost, we need to know where you're buying those agricultural produce from because of traceability. That farm. And that's why, if I digress a little, the Quarantine Service established what we call the export certification value chain, to try to accommodate each commodity in a specific format ready for export. We have worked on 26 agricultural commodities since by 2020. This year, 2021, we're going to add 4 to make it 30. Now, what we did is to showcase those 30 agricultural produce on an easy-to-read format for anybody who is intending export to know exactly what to do. So, the farm, what do you do? How do you do it well? What pesticides to use? When to grow it? When to harvest it? How to store it in the warehouse? And from that storage in the warehouse, who is buying from you? And where is it taken to before it gets to us at the export desk? Now, we are doing that because we don't want farmers to bring something, or the exporter to bring maybe 10 containers for inspection and certification. And at that point, we say all the 10 containers cannot be exported.
Okay,
We
and
see it as a loss.
yes.
So that's why we're doing backward integration to inform even the farmer, the supplier, the exporter that, look, this is your expectation once you come to the field. Probably in answer to your question, instead of answering what do you need to do, let me tell you what you do wrong that can make it your product to be rejected. Those ones are easier to list.
So,
Because
okay, go
you
ahead.
can take 1 hour in explaining what process you need to do. So, but if I list what can go wrong, because we are able to identify about 12 or so, it will be easy to know. 1, phytosanitary certificate. For you to obtain a phytosanitary certificate, make sure that you obtain one from our legal office. Because we've realized some people are going to fake the certificates. We've been having issues with that. Certificate is genuine, it's not altered, it's not mutilated. Now, whatever you declare in your certificate is what you should export. Issue of concealment is not there. And then you should know exactly what are the prohibitive items. Don't export any prohibitive item. Like, people who do a lot of this agbo and this bark of trees, they just go harvest the bark of trees for traditional medicine. Now, we don't want you to export it raw like that, because in those barks, there are furrows that harbor pests that may be incriminatory in another country. Some countries have been able to control particular pests since 1946, like Mexico. They don't have capra beetle in their country.
You know what I find quite fascinating about what you're saying? I know the Quarantine Service released a revised guidelines for this export. And let me read it here. It says the sanitary must be in accordance with the conditions on the import permit of the destination country. The exporter must submit the items for inspection and certification by the Quarantine Service and obtain the applicable certificate prior to shipment. Now, we get to see that the Quarantine Service ensure that everything meets standard. But along the line, we get to see that these produce are rejected. So what changes along the line if the Quarantine Service has given due certification for those exports?
Good. Now we are talking operational issues now. Now we are trying to resolve that problem. So I appreciate what the other parties are doing to ensure that that is not done. Once we finish the certification, we handle that commodity to what we call a handling company, who moves it from there to the aircraft, and the aircraft flies it to destination country. Now, we have realized that there are some issues between our certification and the product getting to the destination. One of it, cold chain. Some of the handling companies, they have failures in energy, in maintaining cold chain where those things are kept 1 or 2 hours before they are flown. That is one issue that we're having. Sometimes we realize that while those things are there, there's connivance. So people go and put this agbo, this. And that's why when he gets there, we did not see the agbo when we were doing the certification. And that agbo or pap or ghee were not satisfied as part of the items we put on the phytosanitary.
So there's breach of trust.
There's breach of trust. There's somebody somewhere has interfered with what it is there. Then the second one, the third issue is that sometimes the belly of the aircraft is supposed to have a cold chain facility. Now, for some reasons, the cooling system fails. Because there was a particular one that we went to Spitalfield, the market in London, and we realized that the vegetables had shrinked. They were looking as if they had stayed for 1 week. Meanwhile, this was something that was supposed to have come in a day or so. We now realized that there was a transshipment. Instead of coming direct, we don't know what happened. The thing went through Belgium before coming. So nobody envisaged that. So by the time it gets there, the quality of vegetable we were expecting on arrival within 24 hours was now delayed to about 48 hours or so. So such operational challenges can naturally come. On our own part too, it could be possible, like we had issues with the diclovers issue of pesticides, that at the end of the day, some of those beans did not even pass through quarantine service.
How did they jump the quarantine service?
They were not satisfied by quarantine service. The first 2 consignments of beans that were intercepted, for which Nigeria was banned, did not pass through quarantine. They did not have quarantine certificate. How they were able to get those things across without quarantine, we did not know. And those people who exported confirmed, because.
But you're in charge of regulation.
We're in charge of regulation, but we're not in charge of the airport and the seaport.
So it means that you are not at the port and you are not at the.
Yes, we have limited areas that we are restricted to in the name of ease of doing business.
But you have collaborative, there's collaboration with other agencies, or you don't collaborate with
I can speak of my own agency, and I want to hold my staff responsible for what goes wrong. I cannot hold another staff responsible for what goes wrong. So if we are supposed to be where we are supposed to be and we are not there, and something passes where quarantine is supposed to see it and we did not see it, like it happened during those first 2 issues. Remember, the NTA was witness to the fact that when the executive order came up and when the issue of ease of doing business came up, we had issues. We were like asked to leave the airport officially, that we should not be there, and we're wondering, this is the government agency that certifies the agricultural produce. So we're still pursuing the review of that circular. The minister is handling that right now to ensure that we are properly placed at where we're supposed to be. Not that we'll go and beg them, please, this job is important, can I stay here? Then tomorrow when they change the new chief executive, he says, the order says quarantine should be out of that place. It does not augur well for smooth operational efficiency. So we still have that challenge, but the minister is working on it. In fact, I just had a meeting with him yesterday, and those are some of the issues that he says that he's working on to ensure that that thing is properly done.
Okay, sir, still on that beans, yes. Because I think we are given a particular period to amend all those things that we did not do, or we are not doing correctly. But now that it's Brexit now, the UK that banned our maize are out of Europe now. Yes. So can we do business with Europe in terms of beans, or we still have to go with the UK, and UK is not part of Europe now?
Do you want me to be frank with you?
Definitely.
You want me to be frank with
Definitely.
you? Yes. Why I say so, that I assume that UK was part of EU. So any offender under the EU remains an offender until he's able to clear himself. Yeah. That's my legal interpretation. I'm not a lawyer, but I think that's what should happen. So let's not hide our head in the sand, and expose other parts of our body. I think that in the normal reasoning, that should apply. But for the Brexit, for the UK now, they are coming out with new regulations, because now they are independent of EU now, and we are following up their regulations. There are new things that they're introducing, they have brought some still from the EU, and they are modernizing it to suit their own country need. So we are complying with that.
Okay.
But I think that even if somebody wants to export beans to the EU, don't forget, our record with the EU is that we are in violation.
Okay, but we can overcome that violation.
Very much indeed.
They said charity begins at home. Let's look at the root causes of the problem. You stated early this year that Nigeria is losing $362.5 million yearly. And Nigeria is known to be the largest producer of dried cowpea. Part of the findings of the quarantine service is that now the beans from the farm has low pesticide residue.
Yeah.
Which is below the maximum residue level. And then the ones in the houses had the high, pesticide residue. So what are the farmers not doing right? If we can correct that, if we can fix that, if the farm produce directly from the farms are in good check, why are the ones in the warehouses having that high pesticides residue?
That is just one issue that we have been able to address.
Have you been able to address it?
Yeah, we have done so.
Okay.
Because if you listen to the last presentation we did, I think the NTA was there, and at Reese Hotel, we came out with a full report of the research that we have done over the years to clearly state what you have said, and then the cowpea export certification value chain which we have put in place, just like the one for the hibiscus too. That's what is actually helping us. But you see, the EU then critically said that we should have an export control measure in place. They use that word, export control measure. And that's the point I'm talking about. For now, we are still deficient in that.
Why?
Because of those two things that happened. Why were there two consignment of beans that passed through and quarantine was not aware? You remember the first one in 2015, 2 months to the time, the expiration in 2016. We had given them all the comfort that were in place, everything was okay. Then the second consignment of 2 containers of beans now exited Nigeria. Aha! They say, look, quarantine, you said you now have efficient export control. How come that we now have another 2 containers? Instead of 1 year, they now give us 3 years suspension.
Again.
Yeah. Which expired on the 30th of June 2019. So, the mere fact that we were able to stop or reduce the level of the clovers or so pesticides in generally in our beans now is just one of the issues that we needed to correct. The other issue is that if we're able to correct it, this is the way they look at it. How are we sure that another consignment will not beat us? Since there's no good export control in place. So what Nigeria needs to do now is to ensure that there's proper export control measures in place. And what that means is that the quarantine should be in the place that it's supposed to be. Every process that we have put in place should be done. Now, I'll tell you something that appears that we need to look at as a nation. The Nigerian Customs Service, the revenue generating agency of government, government has given them a target to generate money for government. The quarantine service is to ensure that there's proper sanitary and phytosanitary procedures so that any commodity or process or facility that runs foul to the SPS protocol is put aside. Now, that singular point alone is not in favor of the Nigerian Customs Service because they would have generated revenue from that transaction. So you can see now that once the Nigerian Agricultural Quarantine Service is not where it's supposed to be, the customs will do their proper duty of collecting duty on that commodity, which is their mandatory, which is their mandate. And you cannot blame them for that. But if the quarantine service is there, we have an understanding with the customs that before they do final clearance, there should be a quarantine clearance certificate. So if quarantine is not there, will the customs not do their duty? Of course they will, or they should.
Okay, sir, you talk about the rules and regulations of other countries. Now, let's look at our own gatekeeping here. What are the procedures you put in place to make sure that, okay, goods that are not up to Nigeria standard do not come in? Somebody showed me a gari from China in Nigerian market. And I think somebody also talked about even common pepper soup from China in Nigeria. Stew from Nigeria, from China in Nigerian markets. So is it not part of your mandate to make sure that such things do not come into a country when we can produce, and we are the largest producer of cassava in the world, but gari is coming from China?
Okay, now, if it becomes something like stew, pepper soup, that is outside the quarantine service mandate because it's already a complete, ready-to-eat food. So the quarantine mandate does not cover that. It's another government agency that should be responsible for that.
Talking about processing and packaging.
Good. So it's not within our mandate, so we don't dabble into such things.
So gari is also...
But gari, if it is produced and packaged, I just saw that this is, so I need to look at that to be able to know exactly what to do. For gari, I will assume that it is what we call semi-processed. So we should have responsibility.
But we have no business importing gari.
Good. I just saw it online. I saw the picture online and I told my people to try and get a sample so that we can see what we're talking about.
What do you put into consideration in terms of certification for imports of food before consumption?
If you are importing food, well, you need to have an import permit. There should be an import permit from the quarantine service if it's plant and plant products. If it's aquatic resources product or no, if it's meat and meat products, you need that from the livestock people. They will give you the import permit. And in the import permit, they will state clearly the criteria for which you are going to bring those things. It should be free from bacteria, it should be from a specific animal, it should be this and that. This is the total kilograms or metric tons they've asked you to bring. And then when you bring, there is a duty of quarantine to check. If they ask you to bring beef, is it beef you brought? Or you went and brought horse meat and you are calling it beef. So all those things the quarantine service will check. Any commodity that is agricultural commodity that is coming in, we need to check to ensure that it is properly. You remember, through intelligence, we were able to get somebody brought in 17 suitcases of beef from South Africa. You remember? Mm-hmm. We intercepted it and we destroyed it because there was no import permit. I will not give anybody import permit to bring in beef for now or poultry for now, except maybe for hatchable eggs that they use it for commercial farms, parent stock farms. So those are what is permitted to come in. So it will be clearly stated in the import permit what should come in. And if you don't have an import permit, like the case of donkey meat, there's no export permit. Nobody will give you export permit. So if you bring it to quarantine, we intercept it. It's even in the custom export prohibition list. So everything is against anybody trying to export donkey skin. I'm talking about import and export now.
Okay. So it means, are you saying that import and export of donkey skin is prohibited, or what are the guidelines if I want to export a donkey skin?
For now, you cannot export donkey skin, and nobody can export donkey skin except he meets the quarantine criteria for the export of donkey skin. And the principal criteria is that you establish a donkey ranch or a breeding farm where you multiply them. And from that stock, you can slaughter skin, and then you export. But going into the national head and to buy donkeys and slaughter them illegally under very poor hygienic conditions, even exposing the people in the locality to public health hazard, is not permitted.
What about plantain? You know, Nigeria is ranked 5th in the world, and it's been told that we produce 3.09 million tons yearly. Why are we not exporting plantain? Because it's not in the export list.
Good. We have not developed the export certification value chain for plantain yet. It's not amongst the 20 that we did. But I can bet that why we are not able to do so is because we don't have specific varieties of plantain that we can export. If you see the fingers of banana overseas, they are long, smooth, very beautiful. No black spots. But the ones we have here, because of the way we even carry them, see, a lady or a man will just carry one bunch, throw it like that, carry another bunch, without even looking, throw it. You know, it is not done.
Yes.
You need to hold this thing like a baby and drop it gently and label it. The label will show exactly the company or the farm that produced it and the date of its harvest. Those are the things that attract products to the international market. The way we produce our own, it will be very difficult for it to go to the international market. So what I would suggest in such areas and for such commodities in the export certification value chain, which the quarantine service have put in place, is that you add value to the product. You can flake it and have banana flakes. You can fry it and have fried plantain and chips, you know, and then export such. In fact, you get more value than exporting the raw plantain fingers.
And you know, that's like one of the most valuable processing, talking about the plantain chips. Don't mind me, I love plantain, that's why I'm saying that. So Musa, I know you want to ask a question.
Yeah, yes, the issue of yam.
Yes.
What happens to our yam export? After the discovery of some bad, what do you call it, produce in UK. So we've not been hearing anything about yam. Are we still exporting?
We are still exporting. Virtually all the commodities that we have been exporting, we are still doing so. This issue of this yam has refused to leave the national arena. The issue of yam principally was because the person that took his to UK, again, decided to opt not to go through quarantine. Remember, his partner to the US took his to US, and he had no issue. Now, to compound the matters for the person that took it to the UK, he engaged Kabu Kabu shipping line that was going from one
port. What do you mean by Kabu Kabu shipping line?
Of course, it's going from one port to another now, picking cargo. And by the time it got to UK, the yams had cooked itself, so to say, because of the high temperature in the ship, in the vessel. Wow. And there was no cooling facility there. So by the time he got there, virtually all the yams had rotten. Of course, was it on NTA or maybe another media? They interviewed him there, and he stated all those things. That the shipping line took a very long time for it to come. And of course, it's somebody that opted out, because I was there in Lagos that day. The person that took his to US clearly said that the minister had warned that he must subject his own. And from what I heard later on, somebody told the man that quarantine certificates is not needed in the UK. Okay. So why should he bother himself? He said, They said yes. So he took the risk.
Let me take you back to the issue of pests.
Yes.
Now, part of your mandate is to prevent the introduction of animal and zoonotic diseases and also, pests for plants. We've seen Zambia record wheat blast, which hit Africa just sometime, was it last year or so? Correct me if I'm wrong. Since 1985, when it was witnessed in Brazil, it's not been witnessed in Africa. Why are we seeing that? What is the quarantine service doing to protect Nigeria, so to say, because of such, pesticides?
Good. You see, control of pesticide is very, very expensive. I mean, control of pests is very, very expensive. In fact, it can wipe out the whole national budget of a country.
And it can wipe out the whole produce of a farm.
It can wipe out the whole produce. That's number two. Now, between New South Wales and Queensland, the state spends $5 million Australian dollars just to control fruit flies. Convert that to Naira. Just one pest. The pest that affects oranges, mangoes, makes them get rotten and they fall. Now, come to Mexico. In 1946, they'll be able to eliminate capra beetle. So they don't want anything that will carry capra beetle to their country. So they are stringent in ensuring that their national countries or countries ensure that their quarantine services are so stringent that they don't allow such things to come into the country. For now, we don't allow cassava cuttings. And then maize, we are careful with maize that are coming into the country because of two major viral diseases. You know, for viral disease, there's no treatment.
Yes.
You have the cassava brown streak disease in cassava, and then you have maize litter necrosis disease in maize. Now, cassava and maize are the two most staple crops in Nigeria. So you can imagine if anything happens to the cassava in Nigeria, no gari, no eba, no so many things, no high-grade cassava flour, no, a lot of these things. Then another thing happening to maize, no tuwo masara, no pap, no this. You can imagine what will happen in this country.
Or even wheat, you know.
Wheat. So, like we talked about the wheat, we are trying as much as possible to monitor the entry of those things. And for every import permit that we give, we do what we call the pest risk analysis. If the pest risk analysis is in favor of the importation, we give the import permit. But if it is not, we will not give. There's no way we'll give you import permit to bring in cassava cuttings from South, Central, and East Africa. Because the cassava brown streak disease is already there. And the maize litter necrosis disease, we are working closely with IITA in trying to find out a way that we can continue to have an advanced information, early warning system for those things in place. That's why we're saying that the quarantine service is an elite core. We have so much to do. People just think that it's just standing by the entry points, border inspection posts. Can this one come in? No. There are a lot more that we're doing to safeguard the agricultural economy. We're a research-based organization. We do a lot of research to ensure that what is here, we know what level they are and to what extent they are going. Our ears and our eyes are open to what the international community know what is happening in those countries so that we can safeguard ourselves, you know, in so many ways. And I think somebody we were discussing, and I said, in my own expectation, if you ask me, based on the level I want the quarantine service to be, I would say we're just about 19 to 20% of what I would have loved to achieve.
And you also said, you know, some time back that the quarantine, looking at plant health infrastructure, if 50 billion naira is invested annually, you know, it will help boost plant health infrastructure. Would you say majority of the challenge for the quarantine service is funding? Because from what you're breaking down for us here, there's a whole lot that needs to be, if we want to look at food safety for consumers.
I must commend the NTA. If you have done a lot of background work on issues that were raised in the past, and I'm happy that you have that at your fingertips and you're reading out the statistics that we had earlier, you know, espoused to the country. I'm grateful for that. That means NTA and the quarantine service were working closely together. So I want to thank the management of NTA because I'm happy to see that some of the issues that we raised 1-2 years ago, even in this platform, you are bringing it up. Thank you for that. Yes, it's important that, that's why I said I've just been able to say maybe 19-20%. Because to have an efficient quarantine service for the country, I need a staff of at least 3,000 to start with.
What is the present manpower now? You can put a number.
We're just about 646 as of yesterday across the nation. We are not there. In 2013, the Nigerian Immigration Service wrote to us that they want complementary quarantine staff in the new border posts they've opened. 2013. We have not been able to answer the Nigerian Immigration Service. So there's a lot that we can do. We don't have the funds to be able to reach out to where we want to reach out. We'll be able to put some of those things in place. But the major thing remains is that we need more government attention to the quarantine service. We have a lot of responsibility under the EFCFTA to be able to prevent Nigeria from being a dumping ground. Because if the quarantine service of this country is not strong, look at the 205 million Nigerians. It's a massive market. Everybody wants to export into the country. So it's the duty of quarantine to serve as a shield, to only accept the good ones and reject the bad ones. Or else we'll end up servicing the economies of other African nations.
Okay.
While they'll be checkmating our own. It appears we have not been able to understand the import of standards and traceability. You know, you just go to the market, you buy something, you take home. You don't care where it's coming from, who has produced it. You buy beans, there's a lot of stones inside. You buy sesame, the local ones, a lot of sand. Fine sand inside.
Yes.
See, these are things that should not be in the first place. But if you go down, is there any threshing machine for sesame that is on the farm that the farmers can use? No. So if there's none, what does the farmer have? He still has to thresh it the traditional way. So he cannot take all the blame, because for one reason or the other, as a nation, we have not set standards and we have not provided enough for the farmer. So at the same time too, the farmers are not supposed to wait for government to provide everything. They should form cooperatives.
There's even the Anchors Borrowers Scheme.
And access funds from those cooperatives to be able to help themselves. After all, if they make the money is not made to government, the money is made to the farmers. They only pay tax.
Dr. Isegbe, I know you have so much you want to say, but again, if we look at these farmers, majority of them is just a means of livelihood. They're just surviving. They don't even see it from the business angle. It's just a means of survival for them. But we want to thank you very much for your time on platform. I know there's so much you want to explore here for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My pleasure. And I'm grateful to NTA too.
All right. And our agri-correspondent, Musa Babaliu, thank you very much for your time. All right. And yes, we've been looking at AFCFTA, you know, the prospect for Nigeria agricultural export. There's so much we're blessed with in this country. We don't have any business importing any produce. What we need to do, like what Dr. Isegbe has said, we need to leverage on what we have, and we need to pay close attention to our food safety. That's Platform. Thank you very much for your time with us. I'm Ruth Aguele.